The millionaire's son remained motionless on the marble floor, his eyes closed, his small body chilled by shock. Beside him, the maid knelt, her hands trembling as she held a tiny, dark, wriggling object. Quote, the butler stammered, paralyzed by apprehension. Heavy footsteps pounded through the grand residence. Mr. Caleb Thompson, a man whose wealth commanded nearly everything, stormed into the chamber, his countenance ashen with dread. Quote 1. He bellowed, rushing forward. Grace's lips quivered as she met his gaze, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't harm him, sir, she whispered. I swear, I was only attempting to assist. Assist, Caleb retorted, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. You touched my son? You approached him without my consent? Grace slowly uncurled her palm. Within it lay something unseen by any present, something peculiar, dark and moist, shimmering under the illumination. Every individual in the room recoiled, their faces drained of color. The atmosphere grew dense, hushed and weighty, until a delicate sound pierced the quiet. Dad, it came from the boy, the very same boy born without hearing, the boy who had never uttered a single word in his life. For a suspended moment, no one stirred, not even Caleb, and it was then he comprehended that the maid had achieved the impossible. Esteemed viewers, this is a poignant narrative of affection, conviction, and the kind of wonder that wealth cannot procure. Remain with us until the conclusion, for what unfolds next will profoundly move you and reaffirm that often the most potent healing originates from those we least anticipate. The Thompson estate was a domain where even silence possessed its own distinct resonance. Every recess gleamed. Each crystal chandelier radiated like burnished gold. Yet, an intangible void persisted. The edifice was expansive, yet it exuded a hollowness no adornment could conceal. Attendants moved with unobtrusive grace through its chambers, their movements calibrated to avoid any audible disturbance. It was said that the master of the house, Mr. Caleb Thompson, preferred this hushed ambiance. Caleb was a man defined by his pursuit of flawlessness. His existence revolved around meticulously planned schedules, pivotal meetings, and transactions valued in the millions. However, concealed beneath his composed demeanor was the heart of a father plagued by sleepless nights. His sole offspring, Ethan, had entered the world profoundly deaf. No medical intervention, no surgical procedure, no costly therapeutic regimen had altered this reality. He had invested years in traversing continents, engaging specialists who peddled assurances of hope. Yet, each return home was met with the same pervasive quietude. Ethan was now a decade old. He had never experienced the auditory sensation of rainfall, nor registered the sound of his father's voice, nor articulated a single word. The singular auditory input he perceived was derived from observing the lip movements of others during their discourse. Occasionally, he would position himself by the window, pressing his ear against the cool glass, observing the trees sway as if they were imparting secrets to which he could never gain access. The mansion staff had adapted by communicating with him through gestures, although many made little effort. Some regarded him with pity, others with apprehension, as if his silence portended misfortune. Yet, one individual perceived him differently. Her name was Grace. Grace was a recent addition to the household. A young black woman in her mid-20s, she sought employment after her mother's medical expenses mounted beyond her capacity to settle. She wore her uniform meticulously each day, ensuring it was carefully hand-washed each night, and her hair always secured in a neat bun. Grace performed her duties with quiet diligence, never voicing a complaint nor engaging in idle chatter. However, behind her tranquil facade resided a heart laden with indelible memories. Grace once possessed a younger sibling, Daniel. He had lost his hearing following a peculiar infection during their childhood. She vividly recalled the doctor's dismissiveness due to their financial constraints for treatment. She remembered the look of utter helplessness on her mother's face, and how Daniel had succumbed silently, never again to hear her voice. Since that tragic event, Grace harbored a solemn vow within her heart. Should she ever encounter another child in similar circumstances, she would not turn away. The initial encounter with Ethan found him seated on the marble staircase, meticulously arranging miniature cars in a precise line. He did not acknowledge her presence as she passed, yet she discerned an unusual quality in his comportment. His movements lacked the typical spontaneity of children. They were exceedingly deliberate, almost motionless. His eyes conveyed a sentiment she recognized profoundly: isolation. From that day forward, Grace began leaving small tokens for him on the steps. A delicately folded paper crane, a miniature chocolate bar encased in foil, a brief missive accompanied by a simple drawing. Initially, Ethan displayed no reaction. However, one morning she discovered the chocolate was gone, and the paper birds were now arranged alongside his toys. Gradually, a subtle transformation began to occur. When Grace attended to the windows adjacent to his playroom, he would draw near, observing her reflection. She would offer a smile and a wave. He began to reciprocate the gesture. On one occasion, when she inadvertently dropped a cup, he emitted a silent chuckle, clutching his abdomen with both hands. It marked the first instance any mansion resident had witnessed him smile. Day by day, Grace evolved into the sole individual Ethan trusted. She introduced him to rudimentary hand signs, and in return, he showed her how to appreciate joy derived from simple pleasures. She did not treat him as a patient, but as a young boy deserving of being acknowledged in his unique way. However, this burgeoning connection did not meet with universal approval. One evening, as Grace was polishing the dining table, the head butler interjected with a sharp whisper. "You ought to maintain a distance from him. Mr. Thompson disapproves of staff forming excessive attachments." Grace looked up, visibly startled. "But he seems happier," she ventured softly. "That is not your concern," the butler retorted. "Your purpose here is to clean, not to foster camaraderie." Grace offered no further words, yet her inner conviction contradicted his directive. She intimately understood the nature of loneliness, a sentiment she recognized each time she met Ethan's gaze. That night, while the remainder of the household retired to their quarters, Grace sat by the kitchen window, the slow ticking of the clock marking the passage of time. She recalled Daniel, her brother, and the profound lack of empathy that had allowed his suffering to go unnoticed. She could not permit such a scenario to recur. The subsequent morning, she found Ethan in the garden, intermittently scratching his ear and exhibiting a look of discomfort. Grace knelt beside him and gently conveyed through sign language, "Are you feeling well?" He responded with a negative shake of his head. She leaned closer, adjusting his head slightly to gain a better view. The sunlight illuminated his ear, and for a fleeting instant, she perceived something that caused her heart to cease its beating. Deep within, a dark object seemed to glisten. Grace blinked, uncertain of her own perception. It resembled a minute, mobile shadow. Yet she considered the possibility that her eyes had deceived her. She refrained from touching him, offering instead a gentle smile and a soft utterance. "Let's inform your father, all right?" Ethan shook his head and rapidly signed, "No doctors." His hands trembled as he continued, "They inflict pain upon me." Grace froze. A flash of agony flickered in his eyes. And in that precise moment, understanding dawned upon her. His apprehension extended beyond mere hospitals. He was consumed by terror. That night, sleep eluded her. The image of that dark entity within his ear haunted her thoughts. What if it signified something grave? What if it was the very impediment to his hearing? She contemplated notifying someone, but then recollected the established protocols of the mansion. Without Mr. Thompson's explicit authorization, no action was taken, and Mr. Thompson rarely engaged with her directly. The following day, her disquiet intensified. Ethan continued to touch his ear, wincing in evident discomfort. Grace followed him into the playroom, her heart pounding with escalating worry. She felt utterly unsure of the correct course of action, but could no longer disregard the situation. She whispered to herself, "Lord, guide my steps, I implore you." As Ethan winced again, and tears welled in his eyes, Grace made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of events. She reached into her pocket and retrieved a small silver pin used to secure her uniform. Kneeling beside him, she spoke softly, "It will be all right. I will assist you." And at that precise instant, as her unsteady hand drew near, the door behind her emitted a low creak. Someone was observing. The sound of the yielding door caused Grace to halt abruptly. She turned with measured slowness and beheld Mr. Caleb Thompson standing at the threshold. His attire was impeccably tailored, as always, his expression placid yet discerning, characteristic of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. "What are you doing?" His voice was subdued, yet carried significant weight. Grace swiftly straightened, concealing the small silver pin behind her back. "Sir, I apologize," she murmured. He was experiencing pain. "I was merely attempting to offer him some relief." Caleb's gaze shifted from her to his son. Ethan sat on the floor, cradling his ear and blinking. He was not weeping, but his countenance clearly conveyed his discomfort. "You are not a medical professional," Caleb stated with firm resolve. "Should there be any concern regarding my son's well-being, you are to inform me directly. You are not to touch him." Grace lowered her head. "Yes, sir, I understand." He exhaled deeply, running a hand across his face. "I have endured numerous individuals offering their assistance. All have ultimately failed. I can no longer afford to entertain further uncertainties." His voice faltered slightly on the final word, but he quickly regained his composure. "You may depart now," he added. Grace nodded, stifling the surge of tears threatening to escape her eyes. She longed to articulate what she had witnessed, but the sternness in his tone precluded any such attempt. She turned and departed with slow, heavy steps. Upon reaching the hallway, she leaned against the wall and whispered, "He has no comprehension of the extent of that boy's suffering." Hours elapsed. The residence resumed its customary quietude. Servants meticulously polished furnishings. The cook diligently prepared the evening meal, and the security personnel stood sentinel-like at their posts. Yet, within Grace's soul, the silence resonated more profoundly than ever before. Her thoughts remained fixated on Ethan, the manner in which he had touched his ear, the obscure object she believed she had glimpsed within it, the sheer terror in his eyes when he uttered, "No doctors." That night, she retreated to her modest chamber, situated behind the laundry facilities, and sat on the edge of her bed. Her Bible lay open nearby, though it remained unread. She simply gazed at the pages, murmuring, "Lord, what course of action should I take?" The ancient timepiece marked the slow progression of time. She was once again reminded of her brother Daniel. The memory of his final day resurfaced with vivid intensity. The way he had looked at her, attempting to convey something he was incapable of articulating. She had made a solemn vow to herself never to stand idly by while another child endured such agony. Grace rose abruptly from her seat. Sleep had become an impossibility. She walked back through the deserted corridor, her bare feet making no sound on the cool floor. The illumination was subdued. The house was in a state of slumber. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning system permeated the atmosphere. She paused outside Ethan's door. The door stood ajar. Within, the small bedside lamp cast a gentle glow. Ethan, awake, was seated on his bed, his hands once again pressed to his ear. Grace entered quietly. "It hurts again," she conveyed through sign language, her movements tender. He responded with a nod, his eyes moist. Grace's heart ached. She knelt by the bed, peering closer. "Let me see," she murmured. He hesitated, then leaned forward. The lamplight illuminated his small ear, and she saw it again. Something lodged deep inside, emitting a faint shimmer. This time, she was certain something was amiss. Her breath hitched. "It's all right," she whispered, striving to maintain a calm tone. "I'll be gentle." She reached into her pocket, retrieving a silver pin. Her hand trembled. "Just stay still." "Okay." Ethan, though visibly frightened, nodded. She took a slow breath and cautiously maneuvered the pin closer. Her fingers shook so profoundly she could scarcely hold it steady. The small, dark object seemed to retreat further, as if to conceal itself. "Please, Lord," she prayed softly, "guide me." Then she felt it. The pin's tip brushed against something soft and yielding. With utmost care, she snagged it and began to pull. For a moment, nothing occurred. Then something slid free, small and slick, landing in her palm. It was black, rounded, and subtly pulsed. Grace froze, her heart seized by apprehension. She had no idea what it was, but she knew with absolute certainty it should not have been inside a child's ear. Ethan's eyes widened. He touched his ear, blinking rapidly in confusion. Then he let out a gasp. Grace leaned in, fear gripping her. "Ethan, are you all right?" His hands flew to his throat, and then his mouth opened. A small sound emerged, raspy and broken, yet unmistakably real. Grace's entire body went rigid, her lips parted, and her eyes welled with tears. You spoke. The sound came again, softer this time, yet clearer. Grace. Her heart stopped. He had just uttered her name. She dropped the pin, her hands still shaking. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You can hear me?" Ethan suddenly covered his ears, recoiling from the insistent ticking of the wall clock. His eyes, wide with fear, also held a spark of wonder. Grace moved closer, tears coursing down her cheeks. "It's okay," she said, her voice quivering. "It's okay. You're hearing for the very first time." Ethan looked around the room, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and shock. He pointed to the window as the wind rustled the curtains. "Sound?" he asked, his voice shaky. Grace nodded, a smile forming through her tears. "Yes, that sound." She didn't notice the door opening again. The butler stood there, his eyes wide, transfixed. "What on earth?" Grace turned, startled. "Please don't shout," she pleaded quickly. "He can hear now. I don't know how, but he can hear." The butler, however, remained unconvinced. He stepped back and boomed, "Mr. Thompson, come quickly." Ethan flinched at the loud voice, covering his ears again and whimpering. Grace gently embraced him. "It's okay. It's okay. Don't be scared." Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his face ashen, his voice like thunder. "What is going on here?" The butler gestured towards Grace. "Sir," she was touching him again. "And look at the boy." Caleb's gaze shifted from the butler to his son. Ethan was trembling, clinging to Grace, his lips moving as if trying to form words. Then, unexpectedly, a single word escaped. "Dad." The room fell silent. Caleb's breath hitched. His body stiffened as if time itself had halted. For years he had yearned to hear that one word. Grace looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "He can hear, sir," she whispered. "He really can." Caleb remained immobile. The butler stood dumbfounded. Even the clock seemed to have fallen silent. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice frail but distinct. "Dad, don't be mad." Caleb's knees buckled slightly. His eyes glistened. He murmured to himself, "That's my boy's voice." But the astonishment rapidly morphed into fury. His voice escalated. "What did you do to him? What did you put in his ear?" Grace shook her head, terrified. "I didn't hurt him, sir. I merely removed something that was inside." "Something!" Caleb roared. "You could have killed him." Before Grace could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hall. Security guards burst in, surrounding her. "Sir, please," Grace implored. "Listen to me. He can hear now." But Caleb's voice was glacial. "Take her away!" As the guards seized her arms, Ethan cried out, "No!" It was the loudest sound he had ever produced. And the last thing Grace heard as she was forcibly removed was the boy weeping her name. Grace sat in the security room, her hands cuffed, tears drying on her cheeks. Guards stood by the door, silent, awaiting instructions. From the corridor she could still hear Ethan's faint cries. Each time he called her name, a piece of her heart fractured. She whispered to herself, "God, please let them see I didn't hurt him." Upstairs, the mansion was in turmoil. Caleb paced the living room ceaselessly, his mind racing. His son had spoken. He had heard his voice. It was incomprehensible. For a decade, every physician had stated it was impossible. Yet, a maid had achieved it in mere minutes. The butler ventured softly, "Sir, perhaps we should contact the hospital. The boy might be in danger." Caleb nodded curtly. "Yes, call them immediately. Tell them to dispatch an ambulance. I want every specialist on standby." Within moments, flashing lights illuminated the driveway. Paramedics entered the mansion, carefully loading Ethan onto a stretcher. The boy continued to try and speak, his small voice trembling. "Dad, Grace." Grace helped. Caleb couldn't even bring himself to look at Grace. He followed the stretcher outside, his heart a tempest of confusion and dread. He remained uncertain whether the event was a miracle or a calamitous error. At the hospital, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and apprehension. Machines emitted soft beeps. Doctors in sterile white coats moved with urgency. Caleb stood beyond the glass partition, observing as they examined his son. His hands trembled subtly, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He had confronted investors, politicians, and global leaders. Yet now, before his own child, he felt utterly powerless. One of the doctors emerged and spoke with measured caution. Quote, Caleb blinked. Quote, 1. The doctor adjusted his spectacles nervously. Quote 2, quote 3. Caleb echoed, a tightness constricting his chest. Quote 4. The doctor hesitated. Quote 5. Caleb's complexion paled. Years? Are you implying that all the specialists who treated him never detected it? The doctor averted his gaze. At times, these matters are exceptionally complex. Caleb's voice rose, though he consciously lowered it to avoid alarming Ethan. Complex? I've compensated your institution millions. Every year I transported him across the globe for treatments. You scanned every extremity, and you overlooked something lodged directly within his ear. Quote, Mr. Thompson, perhaps you should be seated. There is something further. Quote, Maintain diagnosis for continued funding approval. Thompson account remains active. Quote 2. You monsters. Quote 3. Stone. You profited from my son's suffering. The doctor lowered his head, shame evident. Sir, I had no knowledge of that aspect. The board oversees those accounts. Caleb no longer registered his words. He turned and walked directly out of the office, his mind in a whirl. Each step felt arduous, as if burdened by guilt. He had placed his trust in them. He had accepted every assurance because it was simpler than confronting the stark reality. At the end of the corridor, he saw Ethan sitting up in the hospital bed. The boy offered a weak smile, a bandage near his ear. He appeared small and vulnerable, yet undeniably alive. Caleb's chest tightened. For the first time, his son looked at him and heard him breathe. Dad, Ethan said softly, his voice unsteady but genuine. Caleb froze. He was incapable of responding. Tears welled in his eyes before he could prevent them. He walked closer and sat beside the bed. His hands trembled as he gently touched Ethan's face. You can truly hear me? He whispered. Ethan nodded and smiled. Where's Grace? Wo, it sees. Quote, Mo, she's not here. Bring her, Ethan requested softly. She helped me. She's not bad. Caleb's throat constricted. For a considerable moment, he remained speechless. Then, he stood and turned to the nurse stationed at the door. Quote, Minutes later, the door creaked open again. Grace entered. Her uniform was askew, her face pale but composed. She bore the appearance of someone who had wept inconsolably but had exhausted all tears. Ethan's face brightened upon seeing her. Grace, he proclaimed, his voice weak but filled with joy. Grace covered her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. You can still speak, she murmured. He nodded, a soft laugh escaping him. You helped me. Caleb stood silently, observing them. A profound shift occurred within him. All his pride, his anger, his disbelief, it began to dissipate. What supplanted these emotions was guilt, a deep, agonizing guilt. He looked at Grace and spoke in a low tone. How did you know? How did you even consider looking inside his ear? Grace hesitated. Her voice was subdued. I noticed him touching it constantly. He was in pain. I suspected perhaps something small was lodged there. I didn't wish to cause him harm, but I couldn't simply stand by. Caleb's eyes softened. And you removed that object. She nodded. I don't know what it was, sir. It moved. It appeared to have been there for an extended duration. Caleb turned to the doctor once more, his voice quivering. All these years, and not one of you performed a proper check. Not a single time. The doctor appeared defeated. I apologize, Mr. Thompson. This should not have transpired. Caleb took a deep breath, his eyes moist. He glanced back at Grace, standing quietly. You noticed what none of them did, he said softly, because you genuinely looked. Grace offered no reply. She simply lowered her head. I didn't do it for recognition, sir. I did it because I could not bear to see him suffer. Caleb swallowed with difficulty. His voice cracked as he uttered, I was under the impression that money could mend all things. I was mistaken. The room fell into silence. For a brief period, the only audible sound was the faint whirring of the machines next to Ethan's bed. Finally, Caleb spoke again, his tone now calmer. "Grace, I owe you an apology. I should have paid attention. My vision was clouded by apprehension." Grace gently shook her head. "You are a father. You were fearful of losing him." "I comprehend." Caleb's eyes glistened anew. He nodded slowly, regarding her with a nascent expression of admiration. As the night deepened and quieted, he sat alongside his son, holding his small hand. Ethan, drowsy, leaned against him, a faint smile on his lips. Grace remained by the door, observing them. For the first time, a sense of tranquility permeated the room, not the sterile quiet that had once characterized the mansion, but a comforting warmth, the sort that follows a cathartic release of tears. Yet, deep within, Caleb understood this was not the conclusion. If the hospital had been deceitful, others likely had been as well. He was on the verge of uncovering something far more extensive than he had anticipated, and this time he would not remain quiet. The dawn emerged slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to break over the revelations of the preceding night. The hospital hallways were hushed. Caleb had not slept. He sat in the waiting area, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. His mind replayed every misstep he had taken. He had placed more faith in men in white coats than in his own intuition. Without questioning, he had authorized payments, inadvertently allowing them to transform his son into a commodity. When Grace approached him that morning, he didn't immediately register her presence. She stood quietly, a paper cup of coffee in her hand. "You ought to drink this," she said softly. "You have been awake the entire night." Caleb looked up. His eyes were red, his face weary. "You did not need to bring me that," he commented. Grace sat beside him. "You did not need to believe in me either," she responded. For a moment, they sat in silence. However, this was not the same silence as before. It was peaceful, almost restorative. Caleb then spoke. "The physicians conceded," he stated quietly. "They were aware of what was occurring. They concealed it because it generated revenue." Grace briefly closed her eyes. "That is inhumane," she whispered. Caleb nodded gradually. "I have devoted years to establishing entities, corporations, frameworks, hospitals, and programs. I believed I was assisting individuals, but now I perceive that the world I helped shape only acknowledges the voice of commerce." Grace met his gaze. "Then alter it," she avowed. "You possess the agency to do so." He turned his head towards her, his eyes alight with a newfound resolve. "You are correct. I shall." A few hours later, Caleb convened a press conference within the hospital's conference facility. Reporters filled the space, their cameras poised, microphones ready. No one comprehended the reason for the prominent businessman's sudden summons to the media. Caleb approached the microphone, his demeanor composed yet resolute. Grace stood in a rear corner, observing silently. He commenced speaking deliberately, each word measured and laden with significance. "For a decade, I was informed that my son would never hear. I procured the finest medical professionals, the most advanced technology, the most costly assurances that money could acquire, and I believed them. Yet last night, a domestic worker in my household accomplished what no specialist could. She restored her son's hearing." The assembled crowd rustled. The lenses of the cameras clicked with increased urgency. He continued. "What we subsequently discovered is more grievous than I could have ever conceived. My son's condition was not a matter of fate. It was a matter of profit. He was deliberately kept unwell so that certain individuals could continue to receive remuneration." The room fell into an absolute hush. The gravity of his pronouncements affected everyone simultaneously. Caleb lifted a folder brimming with medical documentation. "These are the records substantiating this. They are endorsed by individuals who pledged an oath to heal, but elected avarice instead. This is the outcome when compassion is supplanted by financial gain." He paused, lowering his gaze briefly before raising his head once more. "I was an integral part of that world. I neglected what truly mattered, but from this day forward, that will change. I am establishing a new foundation to provide free medical care for every child afflicted with hearing impairments, irrespective of their origin or their financial capacity." The reporters began to applaud softly. Some discreetly wiped their eyes. Caleb's voice softened. "And the inaugural individual I am engaging to spearhead this initiative is Grace." All eyes swiveled towards her. She stood frozen in astonishment, her hand covering her mouth. Caleb offered a gentle smile. She imparted to me the essence of listening, not with wealth, but with the heart. Following the conference, once the crowd had dispersed, Caleb found her outside the hospital entrance. The air was crisp, the sun bright yet mild. Grace still appeared taken aback. "Sir, you are under no obligation to offer me anything," she stated quietly. "I was merely acting in accordance with what felt right." Caleb shook his head. "You did not merely aid my son. You illuminated my perspective. You reminded me that individuals hold greater importance than authority." She offered a faint smile. "I am relieved Ethan is well. That was my sole desire." Caleb's expression softened. Quote, "Juan." Her smile broadened slightly, tears welling in her eyes. Quote, "Upon their return to Ethan's room, he was propped up in bed, engaged with a small toy car. He looked up as they entered, breaking into a wide grin. "Grace," he called out. Grace's heart was deeply moved. She hurried to him and embraced him tenderly. "I missed you," she whispered. Ethan chuckled softly. "You sound joyful," he remarked. Grace smiled through her tears. "That is because I am." Caleb observed them peacefully. For the first time in his existence, he witnessed the true manifestation of love, pure, unadorned, and authentic. It was not the kind that necessitated grand displays or elaborate pronouncements. It was the kind that simply endured. Several days passed, and the mansion felt transformed. The once oppressive atmosphere now resonated with laughter. Ethan darted through the corridors, his small feet making a rhythmic patter on the floor. He still spoke with a deliberate, measured cadence, but each utterance was precious. Grace resumed her duties, yet no longer as a domestic worker. Caleb integrated her into his household, entrusting her with responsibilities, treating her as family. Each evening, they gathered in the garden. Caleb would review reports for the foundation. Grace would teach Ethan new vocabulary, and Ethan would laugh at the sounds he had once been incapable of perceiving. Occasionally, Caleb would simply sit and observe them, the two individuals who had profoundly altered his life's trajectory. In those moments, he experienced a profound sense of tranquility, a feeling he had not known in years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, Ethan looked up from his drawing and inquired, "Dad, may I say something?" Caleb smiled. "Naturally, son." Ethan pointed towards Grace and said slowly, "She is my hero." Grace covered her face, attempting to suppress her tears. Caleb regarded her with a proud smile. "She is mine as well," he stated softly. Later that night, in the quietude of sleep that had enveloped everyone else, Caleb stood by his study window, gazing out at the serene garden. The fountain outside shimmered under the moonlight, the very same one that had formerly symbolized a profound silence. Yet tonight, its murmur sounded different. He could discern the gentle living flow of the water, a reminder that silence no longer defined his existence. Grace tiptoed past the doorway. "You are still awake?" she inquired. Caleb nodded. "Just contemplating?" He smiled faintly. "About how, at times, the most diminutive voice can affect the most significant change." Grace smiled in return. "That is undeniably true." They stood there in a comfortable silence for a time, the agreeable sort of silence, the kind that required no verbal articulation. When Caleb finally turned to her, his gaze was gentle. "Thank you, Grace. You did not simply restore my son's hearing. You restored mine." She humbly lowered her eyes. "Sometimes we all merely require someone to truly listen." Caleb nodded. "And from this moment forward, I shall." Beyond the window, the fountain continued its ceaseless flow, its sound soft and imbued with life. Within, faint echoes of laughter emanated from Ethan's room, a sound that would never again be taken for granted. For the first time, the Thompson residence was not a domain of silence, but a sanctuary resonating with the melody of love. Esteemed viewers, occasionally in life, silence originates not from our auditory senses, but from the depths of our hearts. We become so absorbed in the pursuit of achievement and comfort that we cease to acknowledge the individuals who genuinely require our attention. Mr. Caleb possessed an abundance of wealth, yet it required a humble domestic worker, possessing nothing but intrinsic kindness, to open his ears and his soul. She did not heal his son through scientific means or enchantment. She achieved it through affection, through attentiveness, and through a heart that resolutely refused to disregard suffering. Grace did not merely enable a boy to hear, she instructed a father in the art of listening. And this, in truth, is the most profound miracle. If this narrative has resonated with your spirit, please do not hesitate to express it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and activating notifications to ensure you never miss another compelling story. Share in the comments the location from which you are viewing and what lesson you have gleaned from Grace's journey today. Your contribution may inspire another to embrace heartfelt listening as well.